In the autumn of 2023, Ranger Marcus Jenkins was surveying an abandoned firebreak deep in the northern reaches of Great Smoky Mountains National Park when his attention was drawn upward. High in the crown of a towering chestnut oak, something unnatural interrupted the forest's quiet order. From afar, it resembled a crude effigy, a scarecrow frozen against the sky. But as Jenkins stood beneath the tree, the shape resolved into something far more disturbing, the outline of a human figure suspended nearly 20 feet above the ground. The form hung unnaturally still. Its arms were stretched outward, fastened to thick side branches with heavy rope. The legs drooped downward, lifeless, while the head tilted forward in the unmistakable posture of execution. Jenkins halted, raised his binoculars, and understood at once that this was no illusion. He radioed for assistance immediately. What stared back at him was not cloth or wood, not a mannequin fashioned as a warning, but human remains. A skeleton, bound into the branches by an intricate web of rope and wire, still wearing the weather-beaten remnants of clothing. Something like a hood covered the skull. The arm bones had been positioned deliberately, arranged to mimic a crucifixion. Through shredded fabric, the rib cage was clearly visible. For 33 years, the remains had hung there no more than 4 meters from a hiking trail, unnoticed. For 33 years, the wind had shaken them, rain had washed over them, summer heat had bleached them, and winter snow had buried them in silence. The tree stood in a forgotten corner of the forest, a place few ever entered, and fewer still looked up. The body belonged to Emily Carter, 26 years old, from Chicago. She vanished on October 7, 1990, while hiking alone on the Ramsey Cascades Trail in the eastern section of the park. Her disappearance remained unresolved for more than 3 decades. Her parents passed away without ever learning the truth of her fate. Emily had arrived at Great Smoky Mountains National Park on October 3, 1990. She traveled alone, driving a rented Jeep Cherokee that she parked near the visitor center in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. It was her first journey into the Appalachian Mountains. Before this trip, she had spent 3 years working as a manager at an advertising agency in Chicago. She took a 2-week break to escape the noise of her life and reconnect with nature in solitude. In a letter to her friend Larva Simmons, Emily wrote that she was no stranger to hiking. During college, she belonged to a hiking club, explored the mountains of Colorado, and spent weekends trekking through Wisconsin's forests. She understood the basics: share your plans, carry enough water, stay on marked paths. Yet knowledge does not always protect. This time, something shifted. On October 4th and 5th, Emily took short hikes along popular routes, Laurel Falls and Alum Cave. She stayed at Elkmont Campground, signed the nightly visitor log, and spoke casually with fellow hikers. Campground manager Robert Hayes remembered her as reserved but kind, someone who enjoyed photographing birds more than talking about herself. On October 6th, she met David Morrison, a 32-year-old wildlife photographer from Asheville, North Carolina. They spoke beside the campfire as dusk settled in. Morrison shared stories of bears he had tracked and places where deer often appeared. Emily showed him her map and asked which trail would be best for a long, challenging hike. He recommended Ramsey Cascades, an 8-mile round trip leading through old-growth forest to a 100-foot waterfall. He warned her the trail was demanding, with steep elevation gain, and that October daylight faded quickly. She would need to start early. The next morning, October 7th, at 7 a.m., Emily left the campground. Hayes saw her loading her pack into the Jeep. She wore a blue windbreaker, black hiking pants, and a gray cap. Her backpack contained water, sandwiches, a rain jacket, a flashlight, a map, and a Canon AE-1 camera. At 8:30 a.m., she parked at the Ramsey Cascades trailhead in the Greenbrier area. A visiting couple from Atlanta, James and Susan Collins, witnessed her arrive. Susan later recalled Emily smiling and saying, "It's a beautiful morning for a hike." Those words were the last anyone would hear from her. James asked if she planned to hike alone. Emily said yes. She explained the trail was manageable and that she expected to return by mid-afternoon. When the couple invited her to join them, she declined politely, choosing to walk at her own pace. At 9 a.m., Ranger Thomas Wilson drove past the Greenbrier parking area and noticed Emily's vehicle. He gave it no special thought. On weekends, several cars were always parked there. Around 1:00 p.m., two hikers returning from Ramsey Cascades, Michael and Jennifer Rogers from Nashville, passed a man heading downhill. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, wearing a camouflage jacket and a black cap. He moved quickly, almost running, staring down at the trail. When greeted, he gave only a brief nod and continued past them. Michael noticed the man's large olive-colored pack. Jennifer saw blood on his right hand and asked if he was hurt. He muttered that he had slipped and kept walking. The couple thought little of it at the time. By 3:00 p.m., Emily had not returned. Her Jeep remained in the parking lot. At 5 p.m., as the light began to fade, it was still there. By 7 p.m., parking attendant Kevin Bradley took notice. The vehicle had not moved all day. He checked inside. It was empty. He contacted the ranger station and reported that something was wrong. Ranger Thomas Wilson reached the parking area at approximately 7:30 p.m. He circled the lot, swept his flashlight across the darkened trail entrance, and called out Emily's name again and again. Only silence answered. Wilson radioed the dispatcher and requested that a search be initiated. By 9 p.m., 4 rangers had entered the Ramsey Cascades Trail carrying radios and flashlights. They moved steadily through the darkness, covering the 4-mile stretch to the waterfall, scanning the forest edges, illuminating the path, and calling out into the night. No trace of Emily appeared. At midnight, the effort was paused until daylight. At 6 a.m. on October 8th, the operation expanded into a full-scale search. 23 park rangers, 15 local rescue volunteers, 2 tracking dogs, and a helicopter were deployed. The focus centered on Ramsey Cascades Trail and the surrounding forest within a 2-mile radius. By midday, the dogs picked up a scent. They followed it uphill to a junction near 4,000 feet in elevation, where an old, abandoned fire road branched away from the main trail. This road did not appear on visitor maps, but it was visible on the ground, a narrow, overgrown scar once used by Forest Service vehicles. The dogs turned onto the road and followed it roughly 300 yards before stopping abruptly. The trail ended there. Handler Jason Reeves explained that such a stop could suggest the person entered a vehicle or was transported away. No vehicles were found. The fire road had been sealed with gates and chains since 1987. Rangers searched the nearby woods thoroughly, moving through ravines, crossing streams, and examining rocky ledges. Nothing surfaced. By the evening of October 8th, the search zone had expanded to 5 square miles. A helicopter equipped with thermal imaging was sent overhead, but the thick forest canopy absorbed and scattered the signal, leaving the ground unreadable. On October 9th, Sevier County authorities notified Emily's employer in Chicago and contacted her family. Robert and Susan Carter arrived in Gatlinburg the following day. Emily's father told Detective Mark Holloway that his daughter was experienced and disciplined, not someone who would wander off aimlessly. Her mother added that Emily planned everything carefully, down to the smallest detail. On October 11th, Detective Holloway began interviewing those who had been in the park on October 7th. James and Susan Collins confirmed seeing Emily that morning in the Greenbrier parking area. Michael and Jennifer Rogers described encountering a man in camouflage on the trail later that day. When asked for specifics, Michael recalled a white male, approximately 35 to 40 years old, slim-build, around 6 feet tall. He had dark hair beneath a black cap, light facial stubble, and wore a camouflage jacket that looked military in style. His backpack was large, olive or dark green. A fresh cut on his right hand was bleeding down toward his wrist. Holloway then questioned all parking attendants in the Greenbrier area. Kevin Bradley, who had been on duty that day, remembered several vehicles, but did not recall anyone wearing camouflage. There were no surveillance cameras in the parking lots. On October 12th, investigators reviewed records of frequent park visitors, licensed hunters, and local residents known for keeping to themselves. 3 men matched the description. Howard Mitchell, a 42-year-old Vietnam veteran living in a trailer 10 miles from the park. Clarence Wade, a 37-year-old hunter with prior arrests for poaching. And Ray Dawson, a 39-year-old former ranger dismissed for violating protocol. All 3 were questioned. Each provided an alibi. Mitchell had a confirmed medical appointment in Knoxville from 9:00 a.m. to noon on October 7th. Wade worked a full shift at a car wash in Sevierville. Dawson spent the day visiting his mother, a fact corroborated by neighbors. On October 13th, the search resumed with renewed intensity. Drones were introduced. The Ramsey Cascades Trail was searched again and again 5 times in total. Side ravines were inspected, caves and rock shelters examined. Volunteers multiplied. Nearly 80 people formed search lines, advancing methodically through assigned sections of forest. By October 15th, no trace of Emily Carter had been found. Rangers recovered an old hiking boot, a sock, and a discarded plastic bottle, but none belonged to the woman who had walked into the forest and never returned. On October 16th, the search was formally called off. At a press briefing, Chief Ranger Daniel Carter stated that every possible effort had been exhausted. More than 15 square miles had been covered. Trails were walked, streams followed, waterfalls examined, and hazardous terrain searched. There was no longer any realistic hope that Emily Carter could still be alive. Her parents refused to accept that conclusion. Robert Carter hired a private search team out of Asheville. On October 22nd, 6 investigators accompanied by dogs retraced the final known route. Along the abandoned fire road where the scent trail had ended, they uncovered a new detail, a truck tire impression pressed into the soil. The investigators documented it and submitted the evidence to police. Tire specialist William Harris identified the tread as belonging to a B.F. Goodrich all-terrain TA, a common tire used on pickup trucks and SUVs throughout the region. Rain had partially softened the print, but Harris estimated it to be 3 to 5 days old, placing it close to the time of Emily's disappearance. Detective Holloway widened the scope of the investigation. He compiled records of pickup trucks and SUVs registered within a 50-mile radius. The list exceeded 2,000 names. Filtering for men between 25 and 50 with criminal histories or suspicious backgrounds reduced the number to 123. By the end of November, 57 had been interviewed. None raised actionable concern. The remaining individuals had either relocated or declined questioning without legal counsel. On December 1, 1990, Emily Carter's case was officially reclassified as a cold case. It was not closed, but active investigation ceased. Holloway assured the family he would pursue any new information should it surface. Robert and Susan Carter returned to Chicago in mid-December. They left their contact details with law enforcement agencies in Tennessee and North Carolina, with park officials, hospitals, and shelters. Every month, Robert phoned Detective Holloway seeking updates. Each call ended the same way. There was nothing new. In April 1991, a hunter discovered an abandoned backpack 12 miles from the park. Inside were water-damaged clothing, an empty canteen, and fragments of a torn map. Rangers examined the items. They did not belong to Emily. That July, a hiker found a skeleton in a ravine near Alum Cave Trail. Authorities responded, only to determine the remains were animal bones. 1 year after Emily vanished, her parents returned to the park. At Ramsey Cascades, they held a quiet memorial. A wooden cross was placed with a plaque reading, "In memory of Emily Carter, forever in our hearts." It stood for 3 months before a winter storm tore it away. Years passed. 5 became 10, then 20. Emily's case faded into the growing archive of unresolved disappearances in national parks. Her name appeared on the National Park Service's missing persons list. Online, true crime forums revisited her story from time to time, offering theories: an accident, a wild animal, abduction, a chosen disappearance. None brought answers. Robert Carter died of cancer in 2009. Susan passed away from a stroke in 2016. Neither learned what became of their daughter. On September 27, 2023, Ranger Marcus Jenkins was dispatched to the northern sector of the park, following reports of illegal logging. Witnesses claimed a truck hauling a trailer had been seen on an old logging road in the Cottonwood area, a restricted zone meant only for service vehicles. Jenkins traveled by a TV along a fire trail long abandoned. Unused since the late 1990s, he was 34 years old, had served as a ranger for 11 years, and knew the park intimately, yet this stretch of forest was unfamiliar even to him. There were no marked paths, no signage, no reason for anyone to be there. About a mile from the main road, Jenkins stopped to consult his GPS. When he looked up, something caught his eye. High above him, an unnatural shape broke the symmetry of the trees. A massive chestnut oak rose nearly 90 feet into the sky, its trunk thick and ancient. Roughly 20 feet above the forest floor, nestled in the fork where trunk and branch divided, a figure hung motionless. The figure's arms were extended outward, fastened to two neighboring branches. Below them, the legs hung loose, while the head drooped forward in a posture that felt deliberate. At first glance, Jenkins dismissed it as some kind of crude display, a scarecrow, perhaps, or a mannequin strung up as a tasteless prank. Teenagers in nearby towns had done stranger things before. But as he moved closer and lifted his binoculars, that assumption dissolved. The skull was shrouded in a rotting hood, thin enough for pale bone to show through. Across the chest clung tattered strips of blue fabric, likely once a jacket. The rib cage pushed outward through the remains of clothing, the spine curved unnaturally. The pelvis was supported by deteriorated ropes, while the arms, only bone now, were bound to the branches with thick climbing rope, yellowed with age and veiled in moss. The legs dangled freely. The feet were gone. At 2 p.m., Jenkins radioed for assistance. Within the hour, the scene filled with personnel. Ranger Chief David Thompson, Detective Sarah Collins of the Sevier County Police Department, 2 forensic technicians, and a fire crew operating a ladder truck. Recovering the remains proved far more difficult than anticipated. Decades of tension had caused the ropes to bite deep into the branches. Over time, bark had grown around them. They could not be untied. They had to be cut away. By early evening, the remains were finally lowered and placed gently onto a tarp below. What lay there was a complete human skeleton female. Robert Haynes, a forensic technician with 2 decades of experience, stated immediately that death had occurred at least 20 to 30 years earlier. The bones were stripped clean by exposure, bleached by sun and rain. Still, fragments of clothing endured, pieces of a blue nylon jacket, remnants of black hiking pants, and traces of cotton underwear. No shoes were present. A fracture was visible on the skull. Later examination confirmed it had been caused by a powerful blow from a blunt object to the back of the head, near the base of the skull. The impact was severe and likely fatal. Additional markings, scratches and abrasions on the wrist and ankle bones suggested restraint while the victim was still alive. On the middle finger of the right hand, one detail remained intact, a thin silver ring engraved with the initials EC. Detective Collins photographed the ring and submitted the image to the missing persons database. Less than 2 hours later, the system returned a match. Emily Carter. Missing since October 1990. The ring was listed in her file, a gift from her mother for her 21st birthday. DNA testing followed. 1 week later, on October 5, 2023, the results confirmed what the forest had kept hidden for more than 3 decades. The remains were Emily's. Detective Collins formally reopened the case. She reviewed every report, every interview transcript, every search map from the original investigation. The body had been found 4.5 miles from Ramsey Cascades Trail, well outside the original search perimeter. It lay deep in the forest, beyond marked routes, in a place neither hikers nor rangers routinely entered. Forensic specialists turned their attention to the bindings. The rope was identified as blue water climbing rope, popular in the 1990s, to 11 millimeters thick, static load, commonly used by climbers and rescue teams. The knots told their own story. Bowline knots secured the wrists. Figure-8 knots anchored the rope to the branches. This was not improvised. Whoever had done this understood climbing systems. Above the body, roughly 3 feet up the trunk, investigators found scars in the bark marks left by metal spikes or hooks. Someone had climbed the tree. The conclusion was unavoidable. The killer had used professional climbing equipment to raise the body and suspend it high above the ground. Collins began contacting former park employees from the early 1990s. Many were retired. Some had passed away. Thomas Wilson, who led the original search, died in 2018. Daniel Carter, the ranger chief at the time, had relocated to Florida. Reached by phone, he remembered little, only that the search had been extensive. The park, he said, was vast. No one could search every acre. Collins then contacted Mark Holloway, the detective who handled the case in 1991. He was 79 and living in a nursing home in Knoxville. His memory was fading, but some details remained sharp. He admitted that he had always suspected the unidentified man in camouflage reported by the Rogerses on the trail. He had never been able to locate him. Holloway asked to be informed if the person responsible was ever identified. Detective Collins ended the call and opened the old suspect list from the original investigation. Howard Mitchell was no longer alive. He had died in 2005 from complications related to liver cirrhosis. Clarence Wade was behind bars, serving a sentence in a Tennessee prison for armed robbery. Ray Dawson, the former ranger, was still living. He resided in Maryville, working quietly at a camping supply store. On October 14th, Detectives Sarah Collins and Jason Turner went to see him. Dawson was 72, visibly frail, his movements slow and labored. He lived alone in a modest house on the edge of town. When asked about Emily Carter, he said the name was familiar. He hadn't been a ranger anymore when she disappeared, but he remembered following the story in the news. Collins asked if he had owned a pickup or SUV around 1991. Dawson nodded. He'd driven a Ford Ranger. Tires? He couldn't recall. Was he in the park on October 7th that year? Possibly. He couldn't be certain. Too much time had passed. When asked whether he knew how to climb trees, Dawson answered without hesitation. Yes. Rangers were trained in rope work and vertical rescues. The detectives requested permission to search his home and garage. Dawson agreed. No lawyer. Inside, they found old climbing gear packed away in boxes, ropes, carabiners, belay devices. The ropes were manufactured by Sterling, not Blue Water. It meant nothing. Equipment could be replaced many times over 3 decades. Collins suggested a voluntary polygraph test. Dawson declined. He said he was not required to prove his innocence. And he was right. Without direct evidence or a warrant, the detectives had no grounds to detain him. They reviewed his financial records from 1991. No suspicious purchases. They traced the Ford Ranger. Dawson had sold it in 1994. The vehicle had since been dismantled. Its tires were long gone. The trail ended again. Collins returned to the original list of pickup and SUV owners compiled in 1991. Of the 123 names, 47 individuals were deceased. 31 had relocated out of state. The remainder were questioned once more. No confessions, no revelations, no breakthroughs. By October 30th, 2023, the investigation had stalled. The detectives had a victim. They had a confirmed homicide. They had an estimated time frame, but they had no perpetrator. No eyewitnesses. No usable DNA. The only thread connecting past to present was the unidentified man in camouflage seen on the trail 33 years earlier. Time had erased that thread as well. Michael Rogers had died in 2017. He and Jennifer had divorced years before. Jennifer, now living in California, could barely remember the encounter. Using her statements and archived notes, Collins commissioned a composite sketch. The result was indistinct: a middle-aged man, dark hair, stubble, a camouflage jacket. A face that could belong to thousands. The image was released to local media. No one responded. In November, forensic teams returned to the tree where Emily's remains had been found. They searched a 100-yard radius, scanning the forest floor for anything overlooked. They uncovered rusted beer cans, traces of an old campfire, and a single .22 caliber shell casing. None could be dated with certainty. Any of it could have been left there by anyone at any time over 30 years. About 6 feet up the trunk, investigators noticed a carved marking, a symbol resembling a cross with 2 horizontal lines. At first, it raised hope. Perhaps a signature. A signal. But analysis revealed it was more than 50 years old. An obsolete logging mark. Unrelated. Collins escalated the case to the FBI. She requested a review of known serial offenders active in the southeastern United States during the late 1980s and early 1990s. 3 names emerged. William Shea Green, responsible for the murders of 4 female tourists in Kentucky. Derek Thomas, a kidnapper who operated across Georgia and Alabama. And Kevin Lee Hunter, who targeted women traveling alone in the Appalachian region. Each lid was examined. Green had been incarcerated for life since 1993. Thomas was executed in 2007. Hunter died from an overdose in 1999. Records confirmed that none had passed through Tennessee in October 1991. In December 2023, the case reached its final designation. Emily Carter's death was officially ruled an unsolved homicide. At a press conference in Knoxville, Detective Collins stood before the cameras and spoke plainly. "We know Emily Carter was murdered. We know her body was suspended in the tree displayed like a scarecrow, like a prize," investigators stated. "What we do not know is who placed her there." Police asked that anyone with information about a man wearing a camouflage jacket who was seen on the Ramsey Cascades Trail on October 7, 1990, come forward. The story spread quickly. News outlets seized on the imagery. Headlines spoke of a hiker discovered hanging after 33 years, of a skeleton concealed in a national park, of a killer who had never been found. The phrase "the Scarecrow of the Smoky Mountains" appeared again and again. Online, the case ignited renewed fascination. True crime forums dissected every detail. Podcasts revisited old theories. YouTube channels built entire episodes around the mystery. Speculation flourished. Some believed the murderer was a local someone who knew the park's hidden paths and forgotten roads. Others suggested a passing tourist, a stranger who crossed paths with Emily by chance and vanished afterward. There were darker interpretations. Some argued the act was ritualistic, that hanging her body high in a tree carried symbolic meaning. Police consultant and psychologist Janet Wilson offered her assessment. Displaying the body in such a manner, she explained, pointed to a need for dominance and control. By placing the victim into the landscape itself, the killer transformed her into something permanent, an object meant to endure, an eternal warning, an unmoving presence. According to Wilson, this behavior aligned with a deeply sadistic personality driven by the urge to assert power. In January 2024, police received an anonymous tip claiming another figure had been seen hanging from a tree near the woods outside Sevierville. Rangers were dispatched immediately. The report proved unfounded. It was an old scarecrow, hung by a farmer years earlier to keep birds away. The forest fell silent again. The following month, Detective Collins received a letter from a woman named Linda Harris. She wrote that her brother, James Harris, had returned from a trip to Great Smoky Mountains. National Park in October 1991, with a noticeable scratch on his arm and an unusual withdrawn demeanor. When she asked what had happened, he brushed it off. "Nothing," he said. "I fell." At the time, she hadn't questioned it. Now, with Emily Carter's story resurfacing, the memory unsettled her. Collins followed up. James Harris, 61, lived in Asheville. He worked in construction, had been married twice, and had 3 children. His record was clean. Detectives visited him on February 19th. Harris confirmed he had been hiking in the park in October 1991, but could not recall exact dates. He acknowledged the injury. He said he had stumbled on a sharp rock. He denied encountering any women or witnessing anything unusual. His wife supported his account, stating he returned home every evening and never stayed overnight in the park. When asked to provide a DNA sample, Harris agreed without hesitation. The results ruled him out. His DNA did not match the only biological trace recovered, a microscopic fragment of male skin embedded in the rope fibers. That DNA remained unidentified, absent from all databases. By March 2024, the investigation stalled once more. Detective Collins reviewed 46 additional individuals from the suspect list, re-interviewed witnesses, and re-examined decades-old files. Nothing shifted. Whoever had killed Emily Carter had dissolved into history. The sole remaining lead was still the unknown man in camouflage. Collins attempted to reconstruct his movements. If the Rogerses encountered him around 1:00 p.m., descending the trail, then the crime could have occurred between 9:00 a.m. and noon, a 3-hour window. Enough time to meet Emily, overpower her, kill her, move her body off the trail, and disappear. But the logistics raised troubling questions. The tree where Emily was found stood more than 4 miles from Ramsey Cascades, across steep, wooded terrain. Transporting a body through dense forest, navigating an abandoned fire road, and lifting it into a tree required strength, equipment, and planning. Either the killer had access to a nearby vehicle, or he concealed the body closer to the trail and returned later under cover of darkness. Weather reports from October 7th and 8th, 1991 showed clear conditions. Temperatures hovered around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Moonlight would have provided enough visibility to move without a flashlight. Nightfall could have been an ally. Another possibility emerged. The killer may not have acted alone. 2 people could have carried the body more easily, raised it into the tree, secured the ropes. But that theory complicated everything. It meant doubling the unknowns. In April, Collins consulted the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit. Dr. Martin Lawrence reviewed the evidence and assembled a psychological profile. In his assessment, the offender was likely male, between 25 and 45 at the time of the crime. Physically capable, comfortable outdoors. Someone accustomed to ropes, terrain, and isolation, possibly a hunter, a ranger, a forester, or someone with military experience. Someone who knew how to disappear. He understood the terrain. The park was not unfamiliar to him. Whether he lived nearby or returned again and again, he moved through it with confidence. Suspending the body from a tree was not merely concealment, it was presentation, control, a ritual act. The killer intended for the victim to remain part of the forest, visible to the land even if unseen by human eyes. Dr. Lawrence believed this behavior suggested repetition. Crimes of this nature rarely occur only once. If there were others, they had never been connected. He recommended expanding the scope beyond a single park. Collins requested records from the National Park Service, focusing on disappearances across the Appalachian region between 1985 and 2005. The list contained 18 women. 6 were eventually found dead, though under different circumstances: falls, drownings, animal attacks. 12 were never found at all. One name stood out. Sarah Thompson, 30 years old, a schoolteacher who vanished in Shenandoah National Park in Virginia in 1993. She was last seen on the old Rag Mountain Trail. Searches at the time yielded nothing. The case had quietly closed. Collins contacted Virginia authorities. They found no direct link to Emily's case, but agreed to reopen the search in the area where Sarah had disappeared. In June 2024, rangers returned to Old Rag with drones, scanning dense forest and steep slopes. The effort produced no results. By September, Emily Carter's case remained unresolved. Collins continued working it during off hours, revisiting files late at night, though other cases demanded her attention. If Emily's killer was still alive, he remained free. Ranger Marcus Jenkins no longer patrols the northern sector of the park. He requested reassignment. He told co-workers that he could no longer pass that place without unease. Each time he drove beneath the tall chestnut oaks, his eyes rose instinctively to the branches, his mind filling the empty space with imagined movement, something hanging, swaying gently with the wind. The tree still stands. The National Park Service chose not to remove it. It is alive, rooted, part of the ecosystem. Instead, rangers concealed a surveillance camera nearby, just in case someone returned. Over 8 months, the footage captured only passing wildlife, deer, squirrels, a solitary bear. Emily Carter's story entered the canon of Missing 411, a collection documenting unexplained disappearances in national parks. Author David Paulides referenced her case, noting one chilling detail: the body was displayed, not hidden, hung like a scarecrow, as though meant to become a lasting fixture of the forest. Online, theories multiplied. The most common suggested a hermit, someone living deep in the woods, far from trails. Forest people. Wild people. Individuals who avoid society, survive off the land, sometimes unstable. An encounter with such a person, some argued, could end violently, but Collins dismissed the idea. A recluse would not likely possess professional climbing gear. The knots were too precise, too practiced. This was not improvisation. It was skilled work. Another theory pointed inward. A ranger, or a former one. Someone with intimate knowledge of the park, access to equipment, and training in rope systems. Ray Dawson remains under suspicion, but suspicion is not proof. Without evidence, the case cannot move forward. The final possibility is the most unsettling: that the killer was simply passing through a tourist, unknown, unremarkable. That he left the state or the country and vanished into another life. Perhaps he is dead. Perhaps he harmed others elsewhere. After 33 years, finding him may be impossible. Detective Mark Holloway, who led the original investigation in 1991, died in October 2024. He never learned who killed Emily Carter. At his funeral, Detective Collins placed Emily's photograph on his coffin and spoke quietly, "We still searching. I promise." Emily Carter was laid to rest in Chicago in November 2023, beside her parents. Her headstone reads, "Emily Carter, 1964 to 1990, beloved daughter, home at last. The case remains open." The Sevier County Police Department continues to ask for information regarding the unidentified man in a camouflage jacket seen on the Ramsey Cascades Trail on October 7, 1990. Each October, as autumn returns, rangers at Great Smoky Mountains National Park hold safety briefings. Never hike alone on remote trails. Always share your route. Carry a way to call for help. The park is beautiful, but it does not forgive carelessness. And every year, when the leaves turn gold and fall, a ranger passes through the northern forest, slows near the old chestnut oak, looks up into the branches and checks just in case. Because if it happened once, it could happen again.